And hello there, and here we are. And oh my goodness, many people ahead of me already. Welcome to all of you. Whoever I've missed, I'm sorry I missed you, but I'm glad you're with me. Helen, thank you for your warm and grateful greeting from Shadyside, and I return a warm and grateful thank you from here in Regent Square. Hello, James. I'm glad you're there. Who's this we you're talking about? Well, we're beginning to flood in. Hurrah! Thank God it's Friday and Alan is here. I agree. I'm always grateful to be here every morning I wake up, I must tell you, at my age. But anyway, it's great to be back. It's great you're back. Thank you, Rebecca. Settling into my coffee. Now, for those of you who can hear the music in the background, it should have been the music and the voice of Noel Coward. However, for reasons that completely defy logic, I can't find the album. I have the album. In fact, I have two albums, and I can't find either of them, and I should have prepared earlier, and I apologize. So you have, as a substitute, the inimitable lyrics of Cole Porter, who I will be mentioning later on as well. But since the two greatest lyricists in the world were Noel Coward and Cole Porter, I suppose having one is as good as having the other. Hello, Robert in Fort Lauderdale. I hope the weather has not been too bad for you. My goodness, that was a lot of bad weather racing across Florida. Oh, yes, David, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, David Bradley, wonderful man. I love working with him. That's really nice. I'd love to get him over here to do something. Hello, Pat from Dividge Street. Hello, Grace. Dark, cold night in Dublin. I know what they can be like. And you can't even go out and enjoy yourself because you're on a level 5 lockdown. Hello, Mark in Rochester. Friday the 13th, yes. Now, there's this myth that it's unlucky. I was actually thinking about this morning, why is 7 a lucky number? Well, it's a prime number. Why is 13 unlucky? I think it comes actually from the Last Supper, that there were 13 seated at the Last Supper, and we all know what happened to number 13, or number 1, depending on which end you're counting from. I've never found Friday the 13th to be particularly unlucky. In fact, some of the nicer things have happened on Friday the 13th, so I wouldn't worry about it. Saying that, my ceiling will probably collapse on top of me, but, let's take the risk. Hello, Joanne from Whitehall, and Kathy from Irwin. Hello to everybody. Oh, yes, that's right. The day the Knights Templars were all arrested. That was a Friday the 13th. Yes, you're quite right, James. Quite right. And Pat, Friday, November 13th, your birthday. Happy birthday. Everybody wish happy birthday to Pat. Hello, Edward and Andrea. And Barry in the Cultural District. It must be very quiet down there at the moment. Yes, Dick, you're quite right. It's very bad luck to be superstitious. Except theatre people are the most superstitious people in the world. We're ridiculous about it. Superstition becomes almost a religion in the theatre. they're usually actually very good superstitions, you know, like don't whistle backstage, you know. That comes from, they used to have sailors pulling the ropes and things backstage, and sailors on the old sailing ships used to communicate by whistling. I should do a program on this, actually. And so if you whistle backstage, it's very likely that half a ton of scenery will drop on your head. So there's always a good reason for those superstitions. Yes, it would be a nice one to do, wouldn't it? Just do a webinar on theatrical absurdity. And who better to talk about theatrical absurdity than me? Anyway. In fact, if I'd recognized it was Friday the 13th, I could have done it today. But Noel Coward is much more delightful. Is wit a lost art in today's comedy? What a question. Yes and no. But that's always been true, and I think I'll be touching on that later on when I'm talking. But it's a good point, a good question. Yes, do one on theatrical absurdity. Yeah, I think I might do that, Chris. Yes, I think I will. Possibly either just before or after Christmas. Yes, Dennis, I think that is a true Noel Coward quote. I like long walks, especially when they're taken by people who annoy me. He was very good with the epigrams. Not quite an Oscar Wilde, but very good. Hello, Ruth. And hello, Margaret from New Haven. Please lower the volume of the music. You don't like the music of... Is that better? And it's Let's Fall in Love. Karen, come on. Oh, you silver tongue, you. I like what you said, though. Hello, Three Buckleys, back to you. Let's just give it another minute or two, and then I'll do the announcements and things. I want everybody to. There's one announcement that's important, so I want everybody to get it. Hello, Mary Lou. Goodbye, Heart. Hey, that was a song. Who says I'm not trendy? I just heard my producer in the background going into peals of hysterical laughter. Thank you, Karen. We do have fun, don't we? We used to play a game, just the title of this particular track, of how absurd the titles of some songs are if you don't get the punctuation right. So you get lines like, "What is this thing called, love?" Think about it. I think we're probably, those who are going to join have probably joined. So I think we'll make a start. Now, I have some important announcements. First of all, some people, oh yeah, yes, take out the music, quite right. Goodbye. And first one important, we had some people calling in with problems. They were finding it particularly difficult to check the webinar on the website and that kind of thing. So our research, our extensive and extremely expensive research has taught us this fact. If you are using an iPad or an iPhone or an Apple computer, any Apple device whatsoever, you have to update your Safari. I sound incredibly authoritative and technically gifted when I say this. I haven't a clue what I'm talking about, but I am reliably informed that if you're watching this or if you're trying to access the webinars afterwards on the website, it's very important. If it's an Apple product you're using, update your Safari. If it's any other, if it's an Android product, Microsoft or anything, you don't need to worry about that. But it is the Safari that you need to update. If you haven't done it, don't do it now. Wait for an hour, then do it. Today's webinar is sponsored. Very, very grateful. Patrick Brady is the sponsor for this week. And I'd just like to remind everybody, if you're interested in sponsoring one of these webinars, just send us an email. We'll send you the details, and we will be extremely grateful. And we will laud you and praise you and sing your name on high, unless you ask us not to. So, as I say, if you're interested in sponsorship, just drop us an email, and we'll get back to you straight away. Other couple of things, just like if we were a radio station, we'd be blasting this at you 20 times a day. It's our fall appeal time, so we're seeking to raise funds in the fall. We would be grateful. All donations, as I always say, every donation counts. Every donation matters. If you can manage a little bit more, we'd be really grateful. It is only by these donations that we can keep going at the moment, because obviously we cannot be on stage, we can't do productions. We have to. The only access point we have to raise funds is either the webinars or our radio style presentations. And on that topic, we start production on our next radio extravaganza this coming week, and it's going to be Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and that's going to be available online, I think, from the 17th of December. So we hope that you will tune into that. It's very reasonably priced, and we'll give you some updates about that. We'll have material coming out, and we'll have it on the website and on the various social media. So you'll be getting information about that coming up. If you see anything about us on the social media, sorry, I'm doing a lot of promo, but pardon me, we have to do it. If you do see anything about us on the social media, don't forget to like us, and more especially, don't forget to share us. It's the way to get the message out is not simply by liking, but by sharing, letting your friends know that you like us by sharing us. We are very happy to be shared. I'm particularly happy to be shared. I have no pride. I'm being delighted to be shared all over the planet. And so for those of you who are tuning into us or listening to us or checking us out on the website from foreign parts, please also consider sharing us. The bigger the family is, the more we like it. And the other piece of news is that for the next 2 weeks, after this week, next 2 weeks, we're doing 2 more programs on Shakespeare. We're going to be looking at what some people think of as Shakespeare's Christmas time play, which is Twelfth Night. And so we're going to be examining the light and dark of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night over the next 2 weeks. So that's something I'm sure that you're really eagerly looking forward to. So, Noel Coward. Now, why did I decide I would do a program on Noel Coward? Mostly, this is for me, because I like him, because I think he's a remarkable writer, and because he is very prominent in a particular line of development that matters to me as a theatre practitioner. So let's begin with a quote from the blessed Wikipedia. And the first thing it says on the page, and I'm using information that you can find on Wikipedia, but it's much nicer when I chat about it. Sir Noel Pierce Coward, 16th of December 1899 to the 26th of March 1973, which also intrigues me because in his youth he was a very good friend of one of the founders, the 2 founders of the Gate Theatre in Dublin, which many of you will know was my particular place of employment for over 35 years. Michal MacLeamore, one of the founders, whose real name was Michael Wilmore, and he was no more Irish than the cast of that new film that's coming out. with the terrible accents that's all over Facebook at the moment. But McLearmore and Noel Coward were boyhood friends and appeared together in a play when Noel Coward was, I think, well, they were both the same age. They were both born in 1899, and Coward died just before McLearmore did. But so it's a little local color there. Anyway, he was an English playwright, a composer, a director, an actor, a singer, a raconteur, a bon vivant. He was what one might describe as the full Renaissance man, known for his wit, known for his use of language, his capacity as a writer, known for his, shall we say, flamboyance. The quote in Wikipedia says what Time magazine described as a sense of personal style, a combination of cheek and chic, of pose and poise. He was, like so many around his time, a self-created being. And this self-created being mimicked in a way, I don't like the word mimic because it's just a methodology that so many artists use to establish themselves. Oscar Wilde did it, and so did Noel Coward. He created himself. And he created himself in a particular way, and the way that Wilde did and the way that others did before them. He promoted himself from what nature had given him to what he aspired to by sheer virtue of his own will, his own intelligence, and his own talent. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a fan. I like Coward very much because I am dedicated as a theatre artist very much. Even though I'm a passionate lover of physical theatre and have done a lot of that and direct in that fashion very often, I have a passionate love of words, of language, of the use of words, and of the capacity and power of words. And Coward was the master of words, just as Oscar Wilde was. Now, I found Noel Coward in that sense, when I was a very young actor. Theatre school, and I went to theatre school in London in the mid-60s, had not really prepared me for Coward. In those days, we did far more in terms of classic writers, classic theatre, Shakespeare, what have you. Relatively few new works. Our training in those days was based on a much more classic line, the old style repertory theatre style, where one was tending to work with what they considered modern writers was anything before 1950. The new writers didn't really percolate through into theatre schools in those days. Relatively few new works. I mean, this is truth. I actually discovered Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot gathering dust on one of the college library bookshelves, and nobody read it. And I remember taking it down and looking at it and thinking, I don't think that's for me. I don't think I'll do anything like that. And then spent actually 20 years of my life touring in a production of it. Such is the vagaries of a life in the theatre. But my attitude to Coward, to anything like that, those writers of the first half of the 20th century, was I would best describe as youthful arrogance, and a basic belief that Coward and Terence Rattigan and all of those writers were old-fashioned, old hat, and worst of all to us, young things in the 1960s, they were old. So they didn't attract us particularly. For us, real theatre, outside of the school, outside of, and I was at the Guildhall School in London, and all of us who were in theatre school at that time, real theatre was a new and vibrant and exciting thing. Even Shakespeare had become new and vibrant and exciting. It had finally escaped from the heavy-handed Edwardian theatre that such people as Noel Coward we considered still to be a part of. We had people like Peter Brook and John Barton literally rewriting the rule book of how Shakespeare could be presented. We had the angry young men of the English theatre. It was like a tsunami of energy arising, new thinking, new constructs, new ways of looking at plays. What became known as the kitchen sink drama period, a theatre, if you like, of cruel reality, centered around mostly in London, not the West End, but the Royal Court Theatre. That was what was so exciting. No young person of the theatre, especially pretentious young actors such as myself, would be remotely interested in the works of Noel Coward. We all learn eventually. And it wasn't actually till the early 70s that I made this incredible discovery, and it was because I was cast in one of his plays, that Coward was truly the master. And that led me on an important trail of discovery that all theatre is simply a development of what has gone before. Now, it seems obvious to me now, and I suppose it seems obvious to you, but when you're a young actor and when all you're thinking about is yourself and where your next job is going to come from, and the fact that you know that sooner or later you're going to be a megastar, you don't think about these things. But when you finally come to address something that you have sort of intellectually rejected and start to examine it properly, you make these discoveries and they change your life completely. Because my discovery of Coward and the way he wrote and his use of language, but also his methodology of writing. Sorry, I'm getting old. The subject matter and his fashion of addressing it led me back to the world of Oscar Wilde and back again through Sheridan and Farquhar and the Jacobeans and the Elizabethans, all the way to Sophocles and the very roots of theatre. It was by truly discovering the nature of one writer that you begin to assess and appreciate the line that they have come through. And one of the important aspects of that, and it was a discovery I made around that time in the early 70s, was a simple realization. And I think I've said it before. The great emblem of drama, the masks of comedy and tragedy, are never separate. They are always conjoined. You always see them linked together. Comedy and tragedy, the faces are the two sides. It's a Janus sort of thing. They are the two sides of the same coin. Comedy cannot exist without tragedy, and tragedy cannot exist without comedy. There is no comedy without pain, and there is no pain without absurdity, is one way of looking at it. So that sounds rather heavy when talking about somebody like Noel Coward, but follow me, bear with me for a while. You can disagree with me, of course, because as I always say, everything I tell you may be wrong. But it was just this line of discovery and realization that led me, for instance, to the two great loves of my theatrical life, which is Oscar Wilde and William Shakespeare. The play I was first in that started my journey of discovery is possibly one of the greatest comedies ever written, once I realized it and why it was such a great comedy, and that was Coward's Private Lives. The realization in that production, in that play, that all great theatre, be it comedy or tragedy, is in fact a satire on life. If a play is not a satire on life, it's not really drama. Because a true satire contains those balanced influences of that which is funny, that which is comedic, and that which is tragic, that which is pain and that which is joy. All great theatre, comedy or tragedy, is a satire on life. Now, Coward, back to Coward. When he was a teenager, he started writing plays. He was lower middle class, and under normal circumstances would not have had the most vibrantly exciting life, but he was a child actor. And it was through that he started to make contacts and became conscious, not just conscious of theatre, but became part of theatre from a very early age. He was about 11. And he wrote his first play when he was very young, and he would keep on writing plays. He wrote plays based on the most important thing a writer can use as source material, the very people around him. And very much like Wilde, he set about lampooning the actual society to which he eventually elevated himself. He joined. He worked his way up in social rank and social order, which existed very much so in those days. And when you're talking about the very early part of the 20th century, the 1920s, going into the 30s, social order was a very important thing. And exactly as Oscar Wilde had done by elevating himself up into society, Coward did exactly the same thing. But while he was doing it, he was constantly watching. He both joined in with that upper echelon of of society, and at the same time, he observed them as an outsider and an insider, which was a marvelous achievement. To coin one of his own song titles, it was as if he was at a marvelous party in which he was both the chief guest and the watching wine waiter, watching the people around him, watching the way society worked, watching the way people behaved, and play after play after play, lampooning it, sometimes with incredible comic wit, sometimes, and in the earlier days, with a much heavier and more significant level of criticism. And from his teenage years, play after play after play, enduring success. He was so good at it. He published in his life more than 50 plays. Now, not every one of them survived or lasted, but each one of them at their time. And remember, they only become classic if they're not just true of their time, but for all time. Some of the plays he wrote were very specific. Some of the pieces he wrote were very specific to the time he was in. But some of them were enduring simply because they were true about human nature. And human nature is human nature is human nature. And technology and fashion and all the other things cannot change that. But many of his works, plays like Hay Fever, Private Lives, Design for Living, Present Laughter, Blight Spirit, are still incredibly popular. They are still in the regular theatre repertoire. And they are plays, many of which have endured far longer and will endure far longer than in public perception and public appreciation than many of the plays of those angry young men that I spoke about in the 1960s, such as Wesker and Osborne. In fact, from that period, it's arguable, and I know some of you will argue with me immediately, but I would argue that of that period in the 60s and into the 70s, those writers, the only one who's truly survived as popular in that sense of the word has been Harold Pinter, of whom Coward was not a fan, let it be said. But Pinter has survived in a similar degree of public popularity. And Pinter, to my mind, is a similar and indeed equal satirist of his adopted upper class. And the plays of Pinter very often approach using the same mechanisms of balancing comedy and tragedy. And you can watch a play of Pinter in which people are suffering and in which there is a degree of aggression and pain and angst. And at the same time, you are constantly chuckling, if it's done well, if it's done right. There is always that balance of comedy and tragedy working together to create the purity of satire and the commentary on the human condition. The comedy of Pinter might appear to be a universe away from that of Noel Coward, but it comes from the same root. It comes from the same intention. Pinter, like Coward, understood that in order to criticize and to satirize, you've got to do things to the audience. You've got to engage them with entertainment. Put simply, for tragedy and comedy to work as satire, you've got to make the audience cry and laugh. Coward was a master wordsmith. He could bring out sentiment. He could make you weep, and he could make you laugh with the best of them. In fact, he was the best of them, to be honest. Not only that, and this is important, he was a composer of literally hundreds of songs. You see this? They're all songs, not plays, not books, not short stories, just songs by Noel Coward. Hundreds, and some of them are wonderful. Some of them they're not relevant anymore because, as I say, some of them were incredibly specific to events at the moment, but some of them endure still, and I guarantee you'll know the names of some of them. I'm going to actually read a little of the lyrics later on, but the songs, they came from, he wrote operetta, comic reviews, musicals, as we would call them now, screenplays, poetry. He also wrote several volumes of short stories. He wrote a novel. And while he was at it, he wrote a 3-volume autobiography. It fascinates me that writers like him, writers like Oscar Wilde, were so prolific. It's as though they never stopped writing. And I suspect that writers such as they never stopped composing in their heads. It is said of Coward that very often he would compose a song completely in his head before he ever wrote down a word of it. And you sort of think, oh, that's not possible. But Oscar Wilde did the same thing. And in terms of music, so did Mozart. It is a gift that some people have. They can think these three things through. I've just spent a couple of wonderful evenings watching the new TV series, The Queen's Gambit. And if you haven't watched it, watch it. But chess players do the same. They play out games in their head. Some people have this capacity. Coward's capacity was with words, with the mechanism of words, with the joy of words, with how words can express, and with how structures of rhyme can work. Now, rhyme in poetry has gone long out of fashion. And lyric writing does not always depend upon rhyme either. Very often it is a much more recitative concept in the modern musical. But for Coward, these things mattered. And all through his writing, whether it's plays, songs, they all contain a fascination with and a deep understanding of both the human condition, and particularly the human condition of the English upper middle classes and the lower echelons of the aristocracy, and the way they use words and the way they use language and the reasons because of it. Words, language is to his mind and for that period, the English, and I'm not using the word British, the English mode of expressing everything, the use of the word or lack of it. Now, his most perennially favorite play is beyond question, Private Lives. It's just rather like at any given moment in the world, there's a Shakespeare being acted at the moment. There's a Hamlet. Somebody right now, somewhere in the world is saying to be or not to be, that is the question. Or just about anywhere in the world, at any given day, some theatre company somewhere is doing Private Lives. It's that kind of piece. And the genius of it is not simply that it's a comedy. I said before, it's possibly the greatest comedy ever written, but it's not just a comedy. It's so much more than that. It is one of the greatest comedies ever written because it is a satire on the human condition and the middle class condition and the absurdities of it, just as Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest is possibly the funniest play ever written, but it is not just because it's full of funny lines, it is because it is a savage indictment of the class system in England in the late 19th century. Coward's Private Lives is an indictment of the upper middle classes in the first half of the 20th century. I call it, in a way, the perfect English tragedy. A tragedy of miscommunication and the inability to deal with emotions. It shows up and makes us laugh at the patheticness of human behavior when it comes to expressing emotion. And Coward had a very specific agenda with regard to that because of his own nature. I'll come to that again in a second. But in this play, the characters do what so many of the English did at that point. The use of romanticism as a substitute for emotions, for feelings. They played at the game of being in love. So what he was investigating, and that's why the title of the play should always be pronounced not as Private Lives, but as Private Lives, because it is about the private lives as opposed to the public face that they present. So what have you got with this play? The plot line is so simple. Two couples on honeymoon. A divorced couple now married to new partners who end up in the same hotel in adjoining suites with a shared balcony. Hell on earth. It is a brilliant concept. It is so simple. That's all you need to create a nightmare scenario. And he exploits it brilliantly because he demonstrates within just the very first act of that play, he demonstrates everything you need to know about the behaviorism of the characters, their selfishness, their disregard for others, their inability to express their emotions, so many things. Let's take the divorced couple, Elliot and Amanda. Amanda has married a new husband called Victor, and Elliot has married a new wife called Sybil. Sybil is considerably younger than Elliot. Victor is considerably wealthy and a little older than Amanda. So you can both see what each of them were looking for in their new spouses. She wanted somebody with money. He wanted somebody who was younger and prettier. Not the best reasons to get married. Victor has no use of language. He is incapable of expressing emotion. I mentioned that it was the first play of Coward's I was in. First time I was in it, I played Victor, and it is a glorious role to play. First originally played by Laurence Olivier, actually, when the play first came out, with Coward playing Elliot. Victor burbles compliments. He is utterly incapable of saying something real. One of my favorite moments, and it always gets a laugh, it's a brilliant line, when Amanda finally, when he's out on the veranda, and Amanda comes out and she's dressed in a negligee, and she looks beautiful, and the moon is shining, and she's glorious, and she's exquisite. And Victor looks at her and tries terribly hard and says, "You look like a beautiful advertisement for something." It's the inadequacy, the inability to actually formulate. All he had to say was, "You're beautiful. I love you." Can't do it. Can't do that. It's got to be qualified because of this English inability to express emotion. Elliot and his new wife, Sybil, are bickering from the very beginning. The moment they start, they can't agree when they're going to eat. They can't agree where they're going to eat. They can agree on nothing. They have nothing in common. They have no level of human interaction. It is just a game that he is playing. He decided he wanted something young and pretty on his arm and chose her. She's madly in love with him. No, she's not. She's madly in love with the idea of being madly in love with him. And Coward again is exploiting all these this human nature to make us laugh at something that is actually not desperately funny. It's going to end up badly for somebody. And of course, Elliot and Amanda over-romantically rediscover each other because they're alone on the balcony. The moon is shining. She looks devastatingly beautiful. He looks incredibly elegant and calm, smoking a cigarette. And eventually they come together. And it's words that bring them together. But again, these wonderfully Noel Coward clipped phrases to slowly build them back to one another and make them laugh at each other, make them laugh at each other's absurdity, because that's the only bond they have. They are amused by the absurdity of the other. So you get these wonderful lines of dialogue, you know, when he's, what did you do afterwards? Oh, I went round the world. How was it? Very nice. Did you go to China? Yes. How was China? Very big. And Japan? Very small. And you get this wonderful rolling dialogue that slowly brings them back together to the point when they could just say, I love you, but no, they have to go in for the romance. There's music playing in the background, and you have Elliot coming out with this glorious, you know, oh, you look wonderful in this damn moonlight, Amanda. Your skin is clear and cool. Your eyes are shining. I always think he's describing a dog. I want him to go on and say, your nose is wet. But it is using words inadequately, and it's Coward brilliantly using the inadequacy of human conversation to demonstrate that they are vacuous. It's going to end sadly. They'll run away together. They'll leave their new husband, new wife, and just run away together because they are fundamentally selfish. They run away on the basis of a forlorn hope of reconciliation, based on romantic rather than realistic idea of love. This is a brilliant lampooning of this kind of person, the selfishness of the rich, arrogant, upper middle classes that were riddling society at that time. They go together, they're in Paris, they try to have conversations, they dance, they're bored. They are bored out of their brains. They've been alone in a room together for 3 days. And the fact is, they have nothing to say to one another. All they talk about, if you examine the scene, they're examining themselves. They're using themselves as points of entertainment. So you get Eliot's philosophy on life, and Amanda's philosophy on pleasure, but it's all about me. But again, the dialogue that he gives them is remarkably clever. It is crystal. It is shimmering all the time. They sound so clever. They sound so appealing. They sound so desirable. And yet at the end of the day, they have nothing to say to one another. The relationship is built on the soft sand of words, rather than any level of trust or understanding. In their private lives, they are simply hedonistic and self-serving. They love themselves far more than they love each other. So here you have Coward, quite genius, writing a play about love, a comedy about love, that is in fact a tragedy about selfishness, about being satisfied with oneself. It's a game of words, and in any game of words, he would excel quite brilliantly, and it's because he also had a profound understanding of English as a language, the way the language worked, the way words would work. And it's an important point when you're examining any play, when you're looking at any writer, look at the way they examine words, look at the way they use words. Any word, I mean, any phrase, and I often use this as an example with younger actors, you know, every group of words put together can mean a multitude of things. And let's take a thing that you find in pretty much all of Coward's plays. One word, that is central to a phrase. And the word's a four-letter word, but not that one. It's love. It is how you use a word. It's the context in which you place the word. It's the image that you want to create with a word. For instance, we use the word love all the time. It is totally diminished. And any good satirist will use that fact because we say it all the time. You know, I love Thanksgiving. I love turkey. I love brisket. I love red wine. I love my puppy. I love you. It's all the same word. It is how it's used, what context. And he does that with every word. He is, and again, he shares this skill with Oscar Wilde. He will utilize words, he will manipulate words in order to fool you into a false sense of something that he will then undermine and undercut. He will use wicked things as well. He, being a master of language, he loved alliteration. He would use alliteration quite a lot. One of the funniest moments of that in Private Lives, when in the midst of a row, which just continues right through, he will just have Eliot turning to his new bride and say, "Don't quibble, Sybil." And you don't almost notice it, but it keeps that bubble of amusement going, that even though you know this is serious and unpleasant, it's still funny because of the use of the words, that bubble of what is amusing and what is worrying, traveling along that same path. He also proves, actually, this just as an aside, and I know this because I've been in the play 3 times. I played Victor twice, I played Eliot once, and I've directed it twice as well. And there is one word, which brings the house down every time. And it is a line that proves that Neil Simon was absolutely right in The Sunshine Boys with the statement, K words are funny. And I don't know, it's one of these little theatrical truths. Any K word is funny if you use it properly. Kumquat, as he says in Sunshine Boys, kumquat is funny. Cucumber is funny. Potato is not funny. Nobody knows why. I don't know why, but it's true. Something to do with the sound on the ear, but K words are funny. So there is a moment in Private Lives which always never fails, ever. When Eliot, in the 3rd act, has had enough of it all, and he emerges from a bedroom with his hat on, his coat over his arm, carrying a suitcase. And Amanda says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Canada." Nobody knows why, but everybody laughs. Why? I don't understand. Coward understood those basic rules of sound and word structure, which I think Neil Simon may have stolen. I shouldn't say that. But when he wrote Sunshine Boys. Anyway, this particular genius came not simply as a writer, but because, he had a stage career as an actor. He was a film actor. He was a director. For 6 decades, he had this vast experience, knowledge, and understanding of theatre. He was the master. And he starred always in many of his own works as well as those of others. He wrote very much for himself, because not simply because it wasn't just an arrogant thing, which of course it was, but also because he had an innate understanding of the nature of the characters for which he was writing. He also wrote on what one might describe as touchy or essentially forbidden topics for the time at which he was writing. The real private lives of those who appeared superior in morals and rank. He addressed topics in the 20s and 30s that would have been considered hugely risque. Way back in 1924, it was his, I suppose you could say, it was his first great critical, if not financial, success as a playwright. He wrote a play called The Vortex. Now, this is a story, 1924, about a nymphomaniac socialite and a cocaine-addicted son. And to write about somebody in the upper echelons of society blatantly as nymphomaniac, sex addict, with a son who was a drug addict, was hugely outrageous. It was as significant and important in terms of addressing social issues as the later works of those angry young men like Wesker and Osborne and so forth. It was hugely shocking because it depicted sexual vanity and drug abuse, not in the lower echelons of society, but in the upper echelons, in the upper classes, whose moral behavior was considered the model. It was the model. It was the ideal to which one should aspire. So here he is, Noel Coward, who we think of as just writing comedies, writing about social issues, not at the lower end, but at the upper end. And it was the upper end of society in which he lived. He had shifted himself slowly up that ladder to the point of acceptance in exactly the way that Oscar Wilde did. And when Oscar Wilde wrote his satirical plays about the failings of the upper classes and the aristocracy, it was in that society that he moved and was venerated. That's genius, to be able to do that. This play, The Vortex, huge success. And it was his first London West End success. Followed that with a play called Fallen Angels, which was a full-length 3-act comedy. And that shocked audiences and delighted them because fundamentally it was a play about 2 middle-aged women slowly getting drunk through the course of the play while waiting the arrival of their shared lover. Again, this was shocking and brilliant because the audiences laughed. They were getting the message, they were understanding the social commentary, and they were laughing at the same time. And that was that important balance I mentioned earlier, that for great theatre, for theatre to be great, for plays to be great, they must have that perfect balance of that which is comic, that which is tragic, of pain and joy. And there is nothing funny about alcoholic people. And yet we watch this play and we laugh at it. We laugh at it, we laugh at coming to this point again, and I've said it many times before, theatre makes us laugh at our fears and cry at our joys. That's what Coward would do. Hay Fever, another genius piece of writing. Now, again, considered probably one of the 4 or 5 great comedies about an artistic family, all right? The Blisses, actors, performers. It is a delightful comedy about a weekend in a country house with this wonderful family of famous people. And all the people who come there are ridiculed, mocked, and made to suffer. They are treated as things to kick around, emotions to kick around, games to play with. You have this wonderfully funny play about inflicting insult and pain on other people. The family at the center of Hay Fever are monsters, but they're the funniest monsters you'll ever come across. And their victims are true victims, but they're so what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say ignorant in that pure sense of the word, that they almost deserve the suffering that is inflicted upon them. It was described as a play. I've got a quote here. It is a pure comedy with no mission but to delight, and it depends purely on the interplay of characters, not on elaborate comic machinery. Now, I would argue that it does a lot more than delight. It does have a moral certainty. I'm not saying you should go out of the theatre with a sense that you have learned something and changed the moral structure of your life. I'm saying it's funny because it's true, because there are monsters like that, and we do laugh at them. There's another important point in that quote, and I'll come to that in a second. He did have flops. I've got the details. He had a play called Sirocco, which concerns, as usual, free love among the wealthy. In other words, people who are rich enough can do whatever they like and nobody can touch them for it because they're rich enough. Nothing new there, is there? This one did not go down well. But it did produce one of Coward's great quotes. It starred Ivor Novello, who was the god of the West End at the time. And Coward described it, it said of him, "The two most beautiful things in the world are Ivor Novello's profile and my mind." I rather like that. I think if you're going to be arrogant, go all the way. He was also, by this stage, by the way, the world's highest earning writer. He had an annual income at the time of over £50,000 sterling. That's back in around 1930. In today's terms, that would be about $3.5 million a year. Not bad from writing the odd play. I wish that worked for me. Again, he kept going on this whole notion of exposing the moral corruption, as it would have been considered, of the upper classes. His next, Design for Living, incredibly risque for the time, because it was about bisexuality and a ménage à trois. It was, even Coward thought it was too much to risk going into the West End with before it got to stay. So he actually opened it in New York, because we know New York is a much more corrupt city. And anyway, the English censor, the Lord Chamberlain's office in England, would never have granted it a license. The Lord Chamberlain would have decided it was completely inappropriate for the English theatre-going public to discover that there was such a thing as bisexuality. So these plays always had this thematic running under them: drug abuse, alcohol, sexual liberation, I suppose you would describe it, that the issues of bisexuality. He never quite went so far as open homosexuality. That came much, much, much later, and in one of his very last plays. But the implications were always there. It's arguable, for instance, and some have argued, some critics, that the Vortex, the question of drug abuse, was actually a cover, a way of dealing with the question of the son being homosexual. But you couldn't go that far at the time. So he used drugs, which was far less sinful than being homosexual, or they might have supposed. He wrote pure comedies as well, but always the pure comedies and the short playlets were always based on that mix of that which is amusing, that which is painful, that which delights us, that which makes us fear, that which brings us to tears, that which brings us to laughter. For instance, he wrote a series of short plays that for himself and Gertrude Lawrence to appear in under the sort of generic title Tonight at 8:30. You may have seen the result of one of those, because one of them was called Still Life, short little one-act play. But in 1945, David Lean expanded it, and Coward rewrote the script for it, and it was filmed under the title Brief Encounter, which is one of the most heartbreaking films you will ever see. Glorious. If you've never watched it, find it and watch it. But again, these plays, this writing was always based on this fact that that which makes us hurt, makes us laugh, the absurdities of a couple, not young, not beautiful. In the movie, it was Trevor Howard and Celia Johnson. This is not about beautiful people or anything else, but it is about people who should be together and aren't and can't because they don't have that emotional capacity. They don't have the language, they don't have the words. One other play that I think it demonstrates his particular genius, a play, in fact, which we at PICT presented about 5 years ago, written in 1941, right in the middle of the Second World War, and it's called Blight Spirit. It's a play about a novelist who he's researching the occult and mediums and things, and he hires a medium for an evening to run a seance, and the seance brings back the ghost of his first wife, which causes havoc for the novelist and his second wife, who is living with him. But what's brilliant about this is that death itself becomes a joke. It's the flippancy, it's the same flippancy that he uses in Private Lives. Eliot talking about death and life, and that death has no fear for him. It's just a trick done with mirrors. The genius of this piece of writing is that, and remember, it's 1941, London and the rest of Britain was being bombed daily and nightly by the Germans. Okay, so I think I just froze there for a second. War was happening in your living room. Families at night huddled in air raid shelters, afraid they may not come out the next day, that a bomb would drop on them. Death, or the threat of death, was all around them. So what did Coward do? He wrote a play. He wrote a comedy about death. He made people laugh at their own fears, which is one of the principal purposes of great theatre. It was a genius piece of writing, and some of his wittiest, and some of his cleverest. And the notion of a game of I'm going to kill you so you can be with me forever, and managing to kill the second wife instead. And so that instead of being haunted by one wife, he's now haunted by two who gang up on him. This whole concept that death is a joke that can be laughed at a time when your daily life is surrounded by death dropping out of the sky. He was also a remarkable performer, by the way. Some of you may have seen or got the album that I couldn't find earlier, where this wonderful performance at Las Vegas. But he was a remarkable performer because he performed himself. He played himself. And it was, again, his use of languages and an ability with language. It was Kenneth Tynan, the British critic, I'm quoting here, to see him whole public and private personalities conjoined. You must see him in cabaret. He padded down the celebrated stairs, halted before the microphone on black suede-clad feet, and upraising both hands in a gesture of benediction, set about demonstrating how these things should be done. If it is possible to romp fastidiously, that is what Coward does. He owes little to the earlier wits such as Wilde or Labouchere. Their best things need to be delivered slowly, even lazily. Coward's emerge with the staccato, blind impulsiveness of a machine gun. And if you ever listen to Coward delivering his own lines, there's nothing slow and languid about them. They are delivered with an absolute machine gun precision. His articulation of words was quite extraordinary. I pride myself as an actor on actually speaking quite articulately. My God, I couldn't come near what Noel Coward could do. His machine gun delivery of absolute and perfect articulation was legendary. And his arrogance was glorious. He was called the Master. It was a nickname that sort of stuck to him. He said it was to do with the fact that he was a jack of all trades, master of none, but he was a master of one, which was the art of theatre. He also joked an awful lot about his own modesty, and I love this one. My sense of my importance to the world is relatively small. On the other hand, my sense of my own importance to myself is tremendous. You have to admire that. He was also asked by an interviewer, I hope you haven't been bored having to answer the same old questions all the time about yourself. To which Coward answered, not at all, I'm fascinated by the subject. So anyway, we're getting close to my time if I've just hit it. But one of the joys of Coward was his capacity to manipulate words and to manipulate ideas. And I played some Cole Porter earlier, and I want to demonstrate what I mean by that. A good question there, asked by Sarah. How did the critics respond to plays like Fallen Angels and The Vortex? Were they enamored as audiences? I think that there was a mixed reaction to it. I think a lot of critics admired his skill as a writer, while not necessarily approving of the topics and subject matter that he wrote about. But again, the reason he came through and was accepted and further up the echelons of society and public admiration was that whatever he did it with such taste, with such good taste. He presented himself as the epitome of good taste. This wonderful thing of the combination of pose and poise, of cheek and chic. There's a lovely story about this. Again, the arrogant side of him. On his 70th birthday, an awful lot of British theatre threw a major party for him at the Burlington Hotel. And he knew that anybody would be there, and they would be dressed to the nines, and everybody would be in black tuxedo and things and everything else. And he thought, how am I possibly going to compete with that? So he arrived at the party about 20 minutes late, dressed immaculately in a chocolate brown tuxedo. And it was that little difference. There's another quote of his which I love. When he was asked, what does the word camp mean? What is it to be camp? And the answer was something, this is probably apocryphal, but I love the story because it just sounds so like him. That if you were walking down Shaftesbury Avenue with a bowler hat, a rolled umbrella, and a rose in your buttonhole, that is perfectly normal. But if you walk down Shaftesbury Avenue with a rolled umbrella, a bowler hat, and a rose between your teeth, that is camp. And it was that kind of subtle, not quite the correct thing, but elegant in its own right, that differentiated him and created admiration for him. So that when he would write things like The Vortex or Fallen Angels or plays about people, dead people in the midst of the war, he did it with such skill and with such panache that the audiences accepted and the critics accepted it too. Just a quick word on the topic of lyrics. And I picked up various things, but of course I've run out of time as usual. And we will come back to this at a later date if everybody wants it. But his use of words to play games and his use of rhymes and rhythms that are utterly adorable. And let me use a Cole Porter example of what I mean. Cole Porter was a genius of lyrics and the use of the internal rhyme. And there was the song that was playing earlier. For instance, I Get a Kick Out of You is a brilliant, brilliant lyric because of the internal rhymes. I get no kick in a plane, flying so high like a bird in the sky is my idea of nothing to do. Or I get no kick from cocaine. We're back on cocaine again. I'm sure that if I took just one more sniff, it would bore me terrifically too. That's such clever writing. That's such clever use of language that you are enthralled and attracted not simply by the theme, but by the very sound of the words. The sound and the use of words is drawing you into the song. I want to just talk about lyrics a little bit, but just one, I'm going to use one example, and I was going to do Mad Dogs and Englishmen and all the rest of them, but we haven't got time. But we will come back to Coward again at some point if people want us to. One of everybody's favorite Coward songs, and I remember the best rendition of this I ever heard, was not Coward singing it, or anybody else for that matter, but it was at a major celebration when Sir John Gielgud recited it as a poem. And it's, of course, in the form of a letter. And everybody knows the opening phrase of the choruses, which is, of course, "Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage." Though the profession is overcrowded and the struggle's pretty tough, and admitting the fact she's burning to act isn't quite enough. She has nice hands, to give the wretched girl her due, but don't you think her bust is too developed for her age? I repeat, Mrs. Worthington, sweet Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Now, he writes this with wonderful politeness. It is utterly charming and sweet and tender, and advice to... He must have had letters like that from Mrs. Worthington's for most of his career. So he turns it into one of the greatest funny songs ever written. She's a bit of an ugly duckling, you must honestly confess, and the width of her seat would surely defeat her chances of success. It's a loud voice. Although it's not exactly flat, she'll need a little more than that to earn a living wage. On my knees, Mrs. Worthington, please, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. So the politeness is carrying through. The genius of it is in the final verse, which you seldom hear, and which Gilbert did. You seldom hear it because initially it was considered somewhat sacrilegious. But the anger under the control of the use of words is so magnificent. Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. One look at her bandy legs should prove she hasn't got a chance. In addition to which, the son of a bitch can neither sing nor dance. She's a vile girl, uglier than mortal sin. One look at her has put me in a tearing bloody rage. That sufficed, Mrs. Worthington. Christ, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Now, he does it with such charm and such skill. Only Noel Coward can get angry with such a beautiful sense of articulation, choice of word, presentation. I just love it to death. So look, I'm going to we could have a whole program about the lyrics of Noel Coward, and one day we will. But what summed him up in so many ways was that, and he summed it up himself in a way, that his words had that extraordinary capacity to do the one thing that I always think, that theatre must be, good theatre, great theatre, must be a guiding, for which it must be a guiding principle. It must balance perfectly our joys, our delights, with our fears and our doubts, to make us laugh at that which we fear, to make us joy in those things that are worrisome, concerning, upsetting. And that within all tragedy, within all pain, there is that ability to see the absurdity of our condition. That no matter what level of moral rectitude you live on, something about you is inevitably bound to be corrupt. And the purpose of theatre, the purpose of the writer, the purpose of the poet, the purpose of the actor is to demonstrate that element of corruption, to show that human frailty is universal. It is not based on class, it is not based on money, it is not based on faith or any other thing. It is simply based on the fact that you're human. And as being a human being, there are two sides to you. And Noel Coward demonstrates this wonderfully. So when you read the plays, I hope you do, and when you go and see the plays, think about what lies beneath. Why are we laughing at this? Why does this amuse us? Why does he make us feel safe to examine these questions? I think it comes in what was basically his own epitaph in a song he wrote called If Love Were All, in which he said that he basically thinks since his life began, all that he really had was a talent to amuse. And that phrase is what's on that epitaphic phrase is on his memorial tablet in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. I think that was it. He had this phenomenal talent to amuse while telling us some terrible truths about ourselves. A couple of quick questions here. Could Ayckbourn or Stoppard compete for classic stature? Stoppard, yes, I think. I think some of Stoppard's play will last. Not all of them. Some of them are just too clever by half of themselves. Ayckbourn, possibly Ayckbourn. What do I think of Joe Orton? I think Joe Orton was a genius. I think Joe Orton is up there. I mean, he was one. I think Kenneth Tynan it was who described him as the modern Oscar Wilde. Orton had again that fun, and with Coward, that wonderful genius for the use of language, for the construction of phrase. Some of his plays are utterly revolting. He died in an utterly revolting way, being basically hammered to death by his boyfriend. Had he lived, he would have written some wonderful comedy. We lost a true genius of comedy when we lost him. But plays like Loot, plays like What the Butler Saw are genius works of comedy, and the use of language. Just simple phrases just pop into my mind. The way you would grab a phrase out of the air and turn it on its head, and our marriage is like the peace of God; it passeth all understanding. I mean, just use of language that was sublime. Whether you like his subject matter or his lifestyle or not, his use of language is wonderful. Coward wrote most of his own music, yes. Did he appear at the Desert Inn in 1955 because he liked to perform or because he needed the money? Coward was phenomenally wealthy. As I pointed out, at one point his earnings were in excess of $3.5 million a year. He was never short of money. He had a house in London. He had his house in Jamaica, which is where he died and where he's buried. No, it wasn't for the money. I think it was for the fact that they really wanted to see him and he really wanted to perform. And he'd also knew that he got to the end of his performing years, and while he could still do it, he still wanted to do it. When he was making films like the Italian Job towards the end of his life, he was having difficulty learning lines and that kind of thing, but he could always remember his own material. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you all very much for being with me. Please do have a program on the lyrics. Yes. Do you know what I might do? We'll have a talk about it. What we might do is do a separate video presentation reading the lyrics of Noel Coward. And I'll get a couple of people to do that. If there's enough interest in it, let us know what you think. We always want you to tell us what you want. We're here to serve you. It's very nice of you to listen to me, but it's very important that you tell us what you want, because, as I say, if we have a talent to entertain, we can only entertain if we know what it is that entertains you. So tell us what you'd like. There seems to be quite a bit of interest in the idea of the more Coward. So yes, we will do a program on the lyrics of Noel Coward, either as a webinar or as a video presentation some point in the new year, because we're a bit busy between now and then. Karen, I get a kick out of you. Thank you so much. Much preferred to cocaine. Thank you so much, all of you. As just a quick reminder, next week and the week after, we're doing 2 programs on Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, the dark and the light side of one of his funnier plays. And it is our fall appeal. We are looking for your help, your support. Anything you can send us really does help. Wherever you are in the world, don't be afraid. Send us money. We will not think less of you if you send us money. In fact, we will love you forever. And thank you again for the sponsorship for the program, which was Patrick Brady. And to remind you, if you're interested in sponsoring one of these programs, just send us an email. We'll get back to you. In the meantime, voting's over, but you still should wear a mask and wash your hands and take very, very good care of yourselves. See you next week.